and considering what the next steps we need to take are. So a lot to update you on, but I'm first going to hand you over to Sir Richard Lees, who, as you know, leads on health and care for Greater Manchester, to give you the overview as to where we are with the latest position on the number of cases. So Richard, over to you. On mute, Richard.
So again, good afternoon, everybody. You should have a table in front of you that shows the 7-day rolling average of positive tests per 100,000 population. What you'll see is overall for Greater Manchester that the figure has deteriorated a little over the last 7 days. It's not to the same extent as it was over the previous 7 days, but still going in the wrong direction. Although if you go borough by borough, you will see that there are quite large fluctuations there. So Rochdale, I'm delighted to say, continuing to come down, and although it's still in the green category in terms of classifications, very almost doubling over that period of time. And I think this reinforces something that we said last week, and I'll be showing you a graph in a little while that will demonstrate this even more clearly, is that we are in a period where we do see rapid fluctuations, although again the overall trend is still slightly negative. I think all of this is part of the background of why we supported urgent preventative action being taken. And there is a coding for the different categories of assessment, and of Greater Manchester now, Oldham is still in the red classification for the number of positive tests. 6 of the other 9 are amber. And if you take amber, what it normally means, it's a warning. It's a warning, and if the warning, and you've got things going in the wrong direction, it's a warning that says you need to do something now before you get to red. And that's clearly what we're trying to do, to bring Oldham back down. It's marginally moved in the right direction, but to make sure everywhere else doesn't get up to that. What I'm not showing you at the moment is the percentage of tests that are positive, and again that has stabilised. It was 2.9% a week ago, and it's 2.7% now. So overall, that's just come down a little bit, and I think that is reasonably good news. If we look at hospital data, again virtually no change really, although the number of cases still slowly coming down in hospitals. So although we have had a large number or a large increase in cases, they are nearly all in community settings, and in general they are not leading to hospitalisation at the moment. Have we got the graph that shows the change? If you look at this, this is how the 7-day rolling total has changed, going right back to we're going right back to the beginning of end of March there up to the present day. There are some caveats on the figures, because clearly in the early days of COVID-19 there wasn't the degree of testing that we've got now. I think it is a really good indication of how you can get changes over a period of time. If you look at that very early peak on that, I think that's Wigan. Wigan peaked really early, and it's had a few fluctuations, and we've seen over the last week it's going up again. But what I think it's been described to me as the nature of the virus now, it's something that is currently bubbling under all the time. So instead of a traditional graph that will go up to a peak and then slowly come down, what we will see is a graph that will be going, will have bumps in it all the way, and that's clearly what we're seeing at the moment. In terms of what we're doing to deal with the numbers, and clearly there are a range of measures announced by government last week, and we've strengthened our local coordination in order to deal with it in Greater Manchester, with a range of very localised actions taking place. Although the data we've got still isn't perfect, and Andy's going to say something about contact test and trace in a minute, It is now means we are getting patient identifiable data. We're getting reasonably accurate postcode data, so we can identify age groups, and there's a lot more young people getting the virus. We can also identify particular neighbourhoods of concern, and we can act appropriately. All of this, I think, requires two things. One is very clear messaging, and I've seen a lot of media reports over the last few days just about how confused the messaging has been, perhaps compounded by the draft or the regulations that were published today. I know I've had no end of conversations over the last 6 days with people who frankly just do not understand what the guidance and regulations are saying. So again, at Greater Manchester level, we're going to condense that down to very simple messages. We're not going to try and explain the guidance in detail because we don't think it's doable in reality, but very simple messages. And clearly one of those simple messages is you don't have social visitors in your own home. Now, we know there are exceptions to that, for example, shielded people in bubbles, but we want to get down to a really simple message so everybody would understand exactly what it is. And saying no social visitors in your own home is, I think, the simplicity we need. And clearly we'd like some support in delivering those simple messages. We'll also be working on messages for particular groupings, not least young people, and again aiming at very simple messages, but ideally simple messages delivered by young people to young people rather than necessarily messages from us. The other thing we need to do is to be clear about enforcement, and we will be looking over the coming days to have targeted enforcement, high profile targeted enforcement, so it's visible enforcement. And we'll be looking at, in particular, pubs, supermarkets, where we see that quite often collection of contact details isn't being done in pubs, social distancing isn't being respected, and in large numbers of supermarkets and other shop settings, customers not wearing face coverings, not wearing face masks. And that's another area we want to get simple messaging over, is that if you're in a public, an indoors public space, wear a face mask. Let's not complicate it with all the caveats, just get very clear messages over. So numbers stabilizing a bit, but still a cause for concern, need continued action. Messaging, simple and clear, understandable, and targeted enforcement. That's me done, Andy.
That's really helpful, very clear. Thanks very much indeed, Richard. So I also wanted to say more about what we can do from here, and following the declaration of the major incident and the extra collaboration that is now taking place, how we can use that to improve our response, which we're always challenging ourselves to do. So in that context, I wanted to say something about the contact tracing arrangements today. And I wanted to share with you a new table which you haven't seen before, but has entered the public domain in various kind of piecemeal ways. But we wanted you to have this as a clear presentation as to where we are up to with contact tracing in Greater Manchester, and clearly where we think it needs to improve. So if you look at the table that's gone up in front of you, what you will see there, particularly the first three columns, is the performance of the national team, the national system, with regard to contact tracing in Greater Manchester. And if you look in the third column, you will see the success rate in terms of successful completion of contacts by that team, varying from 47% in Oldham to a high of 61% in Trafford. So quite a range there, but even on the highest figure, still not good enough. Now, these are people who are the contacts of people who are testing positive. So, critical that, we get to all of those contacts if the system is to work. But currently, not doing that. If you look at the final three columns, just to give you a bit of a contrast, this is the contact tracing undertaken by Greater Manchester itself. And these are escalated contacts, often relating to a particular setting. So I think it's important for me to say that it's obviously sometimes easier to trace people when a particular setting is named, but not completely easy though, because there can be workplaces with different shifts, so it can present its own challenges. But we do take some confidence from that final column in terms of the successful completion rate achieved by the Greater Manchester team, and therefore we think there is more we can do to get those figures up in that third column. So what we've discussed today as a solution going forward is Greater Manchester taking on responsibility to conduct more contact tracing, and it's certainly something that we want to do. But for it to happen, there are a number of things that we will need to agree with the government, and we hope we will be able to do this. So let me just take you quickly through what they are. First, we believe we need a new protocol to be agreed with government with regards to the passing on of contact details when the national team can't reach somebody. Ideally, it probably should be within 24 hours, but at least 48 hours. If there can't be a successful contact made, we need a clear agreement that at that point, those contact details will be handed over in an easy to use form to local teams. And that's something we're seeking to agree with the government and the NHS test and trace system. Second, if that is to work, we are also looking then to see if we can get extra resources to support local contact tracing on the ground of the more old-fashioned kind, i.e. Going door to door. Now, it is possible to consider use of volunteers, and I think Blackburn have used that approach, Liverpool too, but volunteers aren't able to have the full data handling clearance that paid staff would have. And one of our asks then on the government is to see if we can use some of the teams that are in the national team, but perhaps underutilised, reallocated to the Greater Manchester level, so that we can have extra support to carry out that local contact tracing to get the numbers up. But all of that will only succeed to a point. And if we don't also help people follow the advice of this test and trace system, I think we're still going to have problems, because this is the information that is fed back to us all of the time. There are some people in certain workplaces that are finding it very, very hard to follow the requests from the test and trace system. Either they may fear not being paid for the time that they self-isolate, they may fear losing their job altogether, or even if they have access to statutory sick pay, they feel that won't be enough to live on. So we believe this is a crucial issue that must be resolved, and actually needs to be resolved before we get close to the schools coming back. One of the reasons suggested for that very low success rate achieved by the national system is the fear that people have that they won't be able to comply with the request, therefore they don't get back to people who are trying to trace them, or people who are testing positive are reluctant to give the names of their contacts because they know that their wider social group will all lose the ability to work and will have no way of supporting themselves financially in that period, and hence that's another reason that is keeping the success rate low. So we believe this is a crucial thing that needs to be fixed. We are looking at a Greater Manchester level to see if there's more we can do to support people who want to self-isolate but need help with food, etc. But that's only a stopgap. It's not going to be a permanent solution. So we're ready to work in partnership with the government to get this right. We're ready to take on a greater role to do more contact tracing ourselves. We are working out the detail, but these specific asks we make of government so that we can get a clear set of arrangements in place. We think that would be to the benefit of all sides and would create a much safer context in which schools can reopen. Just to say a couple of further points that came up at the meeting, concerns were expressed again about shielding and the ending of the national shielding arrangements on Saturday, which we think was very poor timing, given the announcement that had been made just a few hours before, and has left people in a very difficult position. And there are some people who are struggling to go back to their normal routine and will need help in this period of time. And we repeat that call to the government to help put in place support for people in areas with restrictions who have been shielding and still need support. Again, we're going to try and provide some of that support ourselves, but there may be a limit as to what can be done. Our community hubs, though, are still receiving calls from those people for support, and we would encourage the government to help us to find a solution in that regard. Just to finish, if I may, to reiterate something that Richard said very clearly. Of course, we have been in a position over the last couple of days where it's been hard as people have been digesting the different messages that are out there, quite confusing at times. We think the data we've shown you today again emphasises that it was the right decision to take decisive action last week, and I think people will increasingly be able to see that as they look at the Greater Manchester data. However, it is challenging, and we will need people to work with us. So to reiterate what Richard said, let's get to the heart of this. This is about asking people not to have visitors in their homes or not to visit someone else's home. So no social visits in your own home is very much the message we're giving out today, alongside wearing face coverings as a matter of course and a matter of courtesy in indoor settings. And if we work together, and if Greater Manchester follows two pretty simple asks there, we think we can continue to turn this situation around and hopefully at some point remove these restrictions. But it's too early to be speculating about that. First of all, we've got to focus on what we need to do. No social visits in people's homes. Wear a face covering or a mask in an indoor setting, and I think if we do that, we'll be getting into the right position to be able to bring these figures back down. So I'll leave it there as well. Ross, I think we'll hand over back to you now for any questions.
Thanks very much. Going to get right into it because we've quite a lot of questions today. There's 3 questions on a similar vein, one from Andy Smith, one from the MEN, and one from Global about Wigan. So the questions are, is it right that Wigan has had restrictions imposed on it despite having a much lower rate of infection? Will the restrictions be reviewed on a borough-by-borough basis? But also there's been lobbying from at least one Wigan MP to have the borough removed from the measures due to slow and steady rates. Would you support that?
Well, I'll say something, Ross, and I think Richard may want to come in as well. I think it's impossible, I think, to start breaking one borough off and separating boroughs out, because Greater Manchester is an interconnected place. We've had reports of workplaces in the last week where we've had outbreaks. People from all over Greater Manchester work in different boroughs. We don't all completely live our lives within one borough, and I think that's the issue. And the reason we showed you that graph with that broad timeline showing Wigan having gone right to the top a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, shows you that this can happen at any point. The virus is bubbling under. It's endemic within all boroughs now. And if you look at the figures for Trafford last week, where there was that rapid increase over the course of a number of days, tells you that yes, it is right actually that we have a situation where all of the Greater Manchester boroughs work together. And I would say at this point, if we were to start picking off different rules for different boroughs, as the question implies about reviewing on a borough by borough basis, we might further confuse what has been a difficult message over recent weeks. Wigan is in close proximity to other boroughs where the number of positive cases is currently high. And as it is bubbling under, it doesn't take much for that figure, that spike to go up again. So that's the way we've got to think about it, not as a snapshot on any given day, but the fact that this virus is out there in all 10 boroughs, and it can can increase at any given time. So kind of chopping and changing the advice from one week to the next is not the way to go, in my view.
Thanks, Andy. I'll bring Richard in on that point as well. Sorry, Richard, you're on mute.
Andy's made the key point, which is the one that the table shows, not the table we've got at the moment. The previous table is that Stockport went from 4.8 to 20%, 4.8 cases per 100,000 to 25.9 in 2 weeks. Trafford went from 7.2 to 36.2 in 3 weeks, and because this is done on a week-by-week rolling basis, at one point Trafford topped the 40 mark, and within this period of time as well. We get changes of that sort of speed. We know that families aren't constrained by local authority borders, friends aren't constrained by local authority borders, in particular workplaces aren't constrained by local authority borders. And across Greater Manchester, we've already dealt effectively with a number of workplace outbreaks where the positive cases within those workplaces in some cases came from 4 or 5 districts, and that's the environment that we're operating within. So if what we're doing is to take preventative action, which is what we're doing to make sure we don't have to take more extreme action in the future, then it makes sense that it is on the entire footprint of Greater Manchester. Probably going to say this over and over and over again. We know that people are really struggling with the messaging about what it is exactly that they should be doing. Again, if we're going to contain COVID, we have to have simple, easy to understand messaging that people can follow. And again, being able to do that, simple single messaging across the whole of the Greater Manchester footprint, it will not only help us deliver those messages, it will help people in Greater Manchester do the things that they need to do to keep themselves and their friends and families safe.
Thanks, Richard.
Ross, could I just come back in very quickly just on Niall's point? And I don't know whether Kate could put up the graph with the Wigan line on it as well, because I just want to directly take that point about the lobbying from a Wigan MP saying that the boroughs had low and steady rates. That's the key phrase, isn't it, there, Niall, in that question. The graph, I'm afraid, says that isn't the case. As Richard said earlier, the Wigan line, which you can see that the highest point on the graph is Wigan, which was around late April, early May. In fact, it would have been much higher than that had testing been more advanced at that point in time. And I don't think you can call that low, and therefore I don't think you can call the line as a whole steady. It hasn't been, and experience is that you can get rapid increases at any point in time. So I think it's very important just to show that, because it answers the question that answers the point that the MP is making. Wigan has not been low and steady, therefore it is important to continue to work in the way that we are.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to a question from Joseph at the Bolton News and Bury Times. To you first, Andy, and Richard may want to come in on it. Enforcing the new restrictions will surely stretch the police and other authorities. What will the priority for enforcement be? Will it be people visiting other households, businesses breaking rules, and will pubs and restaurants be punished for failing to make sure households aren't mixing, or is the onus on the individual?
So the priority will be targeted enforcement at repeat offenders, Joseph, and that is what we are clearly saying is what we will do, and it builds on an approach we took earlier in this, where there was a concern around house parties. Greater Manchester Police worked very effectively with our councils in identifying addresses that were repeat offenders, and action was taken. Indeed, arrests and charges were made going back a number of weeks ago. So we will take the same approach here, and it will be an approach that if there is evidence that people are routinely breaking the new rules with regard to home visits, then action will be taken. But equally, if pubs are failing to take people's details when they arrive, and we are receiving lots of reports that it's still very variable out there. So we will use targeted enforcement or mystery shopping, whichever you like to call it, to ensure that all premises are maintaining the right procedures. And of course, the public are able to feed to us names of establishments or to Greater Manchester Police which they believe aren't following the correct procedures. So it will be difficult for the police to enforce households not mixing in premises, and the onus, I think, is on the individual in that respect, alongside the establishment concerned as well. But we are very much appealing for people to listen to the guidance. It's been put out there for good reason, for everyone's health. But absolutely, we will be ready to enforce these new rules, but very much focusing on repeat offenders.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, did you want to come in on that one?
The only thing I would add to that is it talks about pubs or restaurants being punished for failing to make sure households aren't mixing in their premises. And the test has got to be is whether the pubs and restaurants are taking the reasonable measures that they're expected to. So if it's restaurants, do they have disposable menus? Are they only putting cutlery out when they're serving people? Do they have sanitizers? Are their tables 2 meters apart? All those measures that they can take. Do we expect them to interrogate their customers to make sure that they're all in the same household or the same bubble? Well, no, not really, because again, individuals do need to take some responsibility. But if we have got pubs or restaurants that aren't doing their bit of this, and we do get repeat offenders, it will not necessarily just be the pubs and restaurants will be taking to task. In the cases of pubs owned by breweries and so on, we will probably be going to their companies as well and making sure that they're taking responsibility for what is happening in the premises that they own. So we all have a responsibility, and we're not going to hold pubs responsible for what's somebody else's responsibility, but we are going to make sure they carry out their own.
Thanks, Richard. A question from Jennifer Williams at the Manchester Evening News. This afternoon, a lockdown for Aberdeen was announced after a rise in cases that's lower than many individual wards in Greater Manchester. Their lockdown features bar closures and a restriction on travelling 5 miles. Many people will wonder why this is the case. What is the argument against doing this here? Richard, would you like to take this one first?
Well, I think, as Jen said, it's only announced earlier today, so not had time to look at the detail of that. And we also know that Scotland is operating under a different regime to England overall anyway. So I think one of the things I say is that we'll need to study, as always, what's happening in Scotland to make sure that if there are lessons we need to learn here, that we learn them. But one of the things I'd take from my a rather vague knowledge of Aberdeen, and this particularly comes to the restriction on travelling 5 miles. This is a freestanding city which is not connected to large populations nearby, so it is possible in that sense to cut it off from other areas. That is clearly not possible to do in Greater Manchester because of the nature of the city region. And I think it's something I've talked about previously. Not only do we have to have measures that are easily understandable, they have to be appropriate as well. And what's appropriate for Aberdeen will not necessarily be appropriate for Greater Manchester. Thanks,
Richard. Andy, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. I agree completely with what Richard just said. But just to add, maybe it will help residents across Greater Manchester understand what's happening here, given that we're beginning now to see other interventions in other places. We're not alone. This is a new reality that everyone's trying to deal with, and clearly the Scottish government have dealt with it very decisively and rightly, in my view, and that's why we supported similar action last week. Although concerns about some of the handling of it are well known, I won't go through them again here. as Richard says, it does reflect a different approach by the Scottish Government and the UK Government. The Scottish Government are taking a zero COVID approach, and I think that's what comes from that strategy, the measures that you mentioned, Jen. The UK Government have been trying to obviously simultaneously reopen parts of the economy, as well as maintain some control vis-a-vis test and trace, but as we've been saying today, that isn't currently working well enough. So I do think, as Richard said, we need to learn from the Scottish experience, and certainly with school openings on the horizon now, we must improve test and trace. And if we can't do that by a certain deadline, then I think we do have to consider more direct interventions with regards to openings, because I don't think it would be safe to open schools in those circumstances. Schools have got to come back and they must be the priority. But I think you would have to then look at other potential closures if the test and trace system still was not working at a level that we need it to work. So I think this is going to be a reality for everywhere. We're all going to have to be prepared to act in this way. It will be disorientating for residents, but I think people may begin to understand why it's being done. It's obviously to protect people's health, but I think we need decisive action alongside direct and simple messaging, as Richard has said today, and that's what we need going forward.
Thanks, Andy. A question from Oliver Milne at the Mirror. Are the gaps in the national track and trace operation hampering your efforts to control the virus? And have you spoken to the Prime Minister about it?
Yes, they are hampering our ability to control the virus. And no, I haven't had that opportunity recently. I have fed my concerns in to the government about the test and trace system. I'm hoping to be speaking to the head of test and trace later this week. So I do give an opportunity to feed concerns in. But I think we're now hitting a point where we've got to decide, and decide very quickly, where are we going with this system before we get into the depths of a difficult winter without a vaccine, and all of the extra complications that will come when schools reopen, which they must, by the way. But I think we then need to understand, if we haven't got the net in place, the safety net in place, what risks we're exposing ourselves to. So I would say, August is the month to fix this, and it's very clear. I've laid out what needs to happen. I need to stress again this critical issue of support for people to self-isolate. We do have some emerging evidence, I might say, of people reluctant to give their contacts, and it's quite a low rate of names that are passed on. We want to see that increase, because clearly something isn't working here, and we think it is linked to the fact that people struggle to self-isolate. In my view, it should be a simple system. If people need to self-isolate, when they get a message from Test and Trace, they should be immediately able to do so without fear of not being paid or without fear of losing their job. It should be on the jury service principle, about everybody doing what's right in the public interest and looking after other people. And that's the position I think we need to get to, and we need to get to it as quickly as possible. And when we get to it, I think you'll see this system start to work much better, alongside getting the balance between what is the national function and then what needs to be picked up by local authorities. These are the issues that urgently need to be hammered out. And I would say to the Prime Minister, I think it needs his attention, because these are of critical importance. If the government wants to keep maintaining a level of openness with regards to the economy, it has to fix NHS test and trace in a matter of weeks, not months.
Thanks, Andy. Richard, do you want to come in? Fantastic, we'll move on. Adam Clark from Roch Valley Radio, question for Andy. The leader of Rochdale Council, Alan Brett, said on Newsnight last night that we won't let the children go back to school if it isn't safe. Do you think that the government's target of reopening schools fully by September will take place as planned?
I think, Adam, you've absolutely got to plan for that. We've seen massive disruption to children's education, not just in Greater Manchester, but across the country. And obviously, you want the new academic year, the new school year, to start with kids back in school, and that's what we all want. But at the same time, as the leader of Rochdale said, you can't compromise on safety. So it's going to be a really difficult judgment for people at a local level if that safety net in the test and trace system is not in place. And then some really tough decisions will be needed. And I think the government's got to get its priorities right here. It is about prioritising schools. It's also, though, about prioritising the fixing of test and trace. And it needs to be clear that if, as the CMO says, you can't keep reopening things without exposing more and more risk, then something will have to give. So it's a really crucial month that we've got here to get this right. You could not possibly expose young people to risk, but the point is we should be getting in place the arrangements so that doesn't happen. A strong test and trace system, and careful judgments about other openings in the rest of the economy to support a safe environment for young people in our schools. But that must be the priority going forward.
Richard, do you want to come in on schools?
I will, because I think we also need to look at the completeness of this equation as well. We're about to go, or we're in a really difficult economic position, as well as a really difficult health position. And if we're going to look at the long-term health of our young people, missing more education is not in their interests either. So our young people need to get the best education they can. We clearly shouldn't be putting young people or their families at risk. So the job we have working with our schools is to make it safe and to have suitable arrangements in place so that our children can safely get the education that they need.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to take a question from Matt Truern. It's got two parts to it. For Andy in the first instance. People in Greater Manchester who are clinically vulnerable and who were shielding are telling us that they're worried about going back to work. Should shielders still be receiving statutory sick pay in Greater Manchester until these restrictions are lifted? And the second part is Radio Manchester understand that NHS support services like shopping services and prescription collection services will continue from NHS volunteers for shielders everywhere in England until December 2020. But Radio Manchester has heard from people shielding that they can't access volunteers because no one's available because the volunteers have had to go back to their jobs.
Well, thanks, thanks, Matt, for those questions. I mean, it's an issue that I raised at the weekend. I think it was very unfortunate that we had the announcement and then the removal of shielding almost within 24 hours of what the government had said. What were people who've been shielding for months in Greater Manchester to make of that? At the same time, they're being told that there's a new risk out there and people should stay within their households. Within hours, then to be told, but it's fine, we're going to remove the support you've been receiving. It just wasn't right. It was inhumane, to be honest, and the government shouldn't have let it happen. As a very minimum, we should have seen the continuation of shielding arrangements in Greater Manchester, East Lancashire and parts of West Yorkshire subject to new restrictions, in the same way that shielding's been maintained, as I understand it, in Leicester and Luton. I honestly don't understand why they didn't do that. So I would certainly support a solution, whether it's the solution that you mentioned or a different one. Absolutely, there needs to be a solution. And we picked up from our leaders today that there is a lot of concern out there. And as I mentioned, calls are still coming into our community hubs. So there still are volunteers attached to those hubs. But as you picked up, maybe those volunteers aren't sufficient now to pick up the level of work that's coming through. This was just wrong. Now, whether it was an oversight or not, I don't know. But I genuinely would ask the government again today, let me repeat this call on them. It cannot be right at a time when you're asking people to observe extra rules and to limit visits, to limit also their contact with other people. At that same time, you're saying to people, OK, there's new restrictions out there, you need to be safe, but it's OK for people who've been shielding to start going to the shops again or start going to pick their own prescriptions up. to me, that is sending a very, very big mixed message. It puts people in a distressing and unfair situation. And I do call again on the government to review this decision to end shielding in Greater Manchester and to reinstate it as quickly as possible.
Thanks very much, Andy. Richard, do you want to come in?
Yeah, not to answer the question per se, but to say a bit about what we've been doing in Greater Manchester in order to support these people, because I think Andy's clearly set out why the changes shouldn't have been made, but local authorities have been doing risk assessments with all the people that they've been in contact with to make sure that we are in a position to continue providing support for those people who need it as best we can. Of course, one of the difficulties around this is that the funding disappears as well, so it just adds to the underfunding of local authorities. But we across Greater Manchester are not going to be ignoring the needs of vulnerable people. We will be continuing to do what we can to make sure they get the support they need.
Thanks, Richard. Andy, a question from Samantha Jagger at BBC News Online. Have GMP released details to you of any lockdown breaches which have happened since Thursday?
What they have released, Samantha, is details of the number of calls they received over the last weekend, and what they've said is the number of COVID-related calls was higher the weekend just gone than it was at any time in the previous 9 weeks, and I think that reflects heightened concern amongst the public and perhaps an extra willingness to report gatherings. But I think there were concerns around over 700 gatherings, as Greater Manchester Police have said. So now, obviously, it's important to know that might not always be right. It may be people ringing in concerned when actually there was a legitimate reason for a gathering. But I think certainly there was huge demand on the police last weekend, and it's going to be a challenging situation going forward. And again, that's why we'd appeal to people. I know people will say it was confusing last weekend, and we've got sympathy with them. Richard and I have said that today. But what we both would say back today is, again, please, there's at the heart of this a simple message, and that's no social visits to your home. And ahead of this weekend, we'd ask everybody to take that on board. It's about your health, it's about your family's health, it's about the well-being of the whole community. Don't do the selfish thing, do the right thing. Listen to what's being said. It's been said for good reason. The stats bear that out. And I think if we all just focus on that now, on the simple ask that's been made of people, then we will be able to get this situation in Greater Manchester coming back to where we all want it to be.
Thanks, Andy. A couple of quick questions from Andy Bounds at the FT. Of the 98% of people contacted by the GM system, how many self-isolate, and is there any follow-up? And also, you talked about the low level of contacts each person gave. Andy's asking, what is the average number? So, Andy, if you want to go at that one first, and then we'll bring in Richard.
Thanks, Andy. On your first question, I don't know is the answer. I think it is quite a high success rate, but I don't know for sure. Richard may know the answer to that question. Obviously, these are people who we have concerns about in a particular setting, so it's easier to put in place arrangements with the employer, and it's an easier thing to do. But I wouldn't be able to tell you, Andy, in those circumstances, how many then go on to self-isolate. On your second question, we think the average, again, this is just the data that I've been given, and if it's wrong, I will come back to you with a correction, but we think on average is around 2.5, which suggests that it's way too low for some people, and hence this concern about people not passing on all of the names of contacts. And as I say, there may be understandable reasons why they're not doing that. And that's why we're continuously making this call on the government. Help for people to self-isolate, a simple system, build confidence that people can do it without losing pay, without losing their job. It needs to be that direct, simple and clear. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Thanks. Bring Richard in.
We've not got a precise figure, Andy, but the vast majority of people contacted say they will self-isolate. And again, this does come down to people taking responsibility. If people say they will self-isolate, we have to believe them. We simply do not have the resource to go around checking up on everybody to make sure that they are doing exactly that. But there is a really positive response from most people. They recognise there is a need to self-isolate. They say they're going to do it. I think they do it.
Thanks very much. Andy, just a quick follow-up from Samantha Jagger at BBC News Online. Just to confirm about the GMP statistic, was that about 700 reports of gatherings at the weekend or an overall figure?
I only just have received that figure myself, Ross, so we may have to just double check that with Greater Manchester Police. I'm not entirely sure whether it's 700. The actual figure was 754 to be precise. I'm not sure whether that was 764, I should say. I'm not sure whether it's 764 reports or 764 proven gatherings. It's it's not clear. So apologies, Samantha. We will clarify that. But what is clear is that this was the busiest weekend with COVID-related reports in 9 weeks, and I think that itself is a revealing statistic.
Thanks, Andy. Question from, just because Adam's had a question, I'm going to go to Hannah Granada. A bit of a technical question, sorry. Blackburn say they are already receiving details of the people not being reached by the National Test and Trace system after 48 hours. Do you have to get a specific agreement with the government for this, for the information to be handed over? It seems odd that Blackburn have it, but you don't. Should I put that one to Richard, I think, in the first instance?
The short answer is yes, we do need to get agreement. It's not government, it's the Test and Trace, National Test and Trace Service to provide that data within that speed of time. And it was in, I think, what Andy listed as one of our asks of government, that this becomes a standard, that we do get that information at the latest within that 48-hour period. At one point, Leicester were getting it within 24 hours, or sorry, at the 24-hour mark, which is even better than 48 hours. But given that ideally you want people to self-isolate within 48 hours, then we do need to be getting that information a lot quicker if we're going to be able to take the most effective action to follow up on it.
Thanks, Richard. Andy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to reiterate that point, Ross, ideally it's 24 hours. 48 would be good because it would be a start, but it's 24. Just to give Hannah a bit more information, because it's a little bit of progress, we understand Rochdale will enter into an agreement and a pilot on this next week. But we do want that agreement for it to be GM-wide as quickly as possible, and ideally, as Richard said, 24 hours, not 48.
Thanks, Andy. And just go back to Adam Clark, which looks to be our final question, unless any come in the next couple of minutes. Quick follow-up for Andy on transport. On the 15th of July briefing, you showed us a graph regarding face mask compliance on public transport in the morning peak shown and the morning peak showed higher compliance than the evening peak. Is this still the picture, or has compliance improved on the evening peak?
It's certainly improved, Adam, following two things. A week of action that we had on the system with, again, target enforcement on the transport system, and that certainly increased levels of compliance. I'm just looking to see if I have any figures on it. The second thing, though, of course, was the change in the law around shops, and I think that further had a knock-on effect on public transport. So I'm just looking. No, I don't have it in my graphs at the moment. It's much higher, but it's not as high as we need it to be, and there are still reports of people, anecdotal reports of people using the transport system, reporting seeing young people with no face coverings on trams and on buses. So there is more to be done, and as I say, it's an appeal to people to to remember their obligations to others. You know, this is a dangerous time that we're all living through, and it's disrespectful to just flout the rules. It makes people feel very nervous. It makes older people quite fearful of using public transport. I've certainly had that put to me on the phone in that I do. Older people ringing in saying when they see young people without face coverings on the bus or the tram, they don't feel they can get on. So I think just ask people to bear that in mind. You know, it's your actions can really damage other people's quality of life, and you know, we all need to look after each other at a time like this. And the appeal goes out again for people just to get used to wearing those face coverings. A matter, of course, we've all had to take a bit of time to get used to it, but I think we are getting used to it. And from here on in, as I say, the more we do it, the more we will be putting ourselves in the best position to get these restrictions lifted in Greater Manchester.
Thanks, Andy. Final question from Jen Williams, which I'll put to Richard first, and then Andy, if you want to answer it and have any final thoughts. Please, could you clarify why you haven't had that contact tracing data? So this goes back to Hannah Miller's question. You've been asking for it for ages. What's the issue?
Well, Jen, I know you like short and to the point answers. I cannot think of any good reason why we cannot have this contact tracing data. You're right, we have been asking for it for ages, but other places are now getting it. If other places are now getting it, there's clearly no technical reason in making the data available. So if it can be done, it should be done. Although, again, I'd have to add to that is that, and it's something, again, that Andy touched on in his introduction, was that we also need some of that national resource that isn't being fully utilised, and to make sure that we can do the local tracing process even more effectively.
Thanks, Richard, and then Andy.
Yeah, so it's a good question. As Richard says, Jen, there's no justification that I can see. If I suppose if the only one you could possibly point to would be where we got to was that the national system would do this more kind of routine level contact rate tracing, and it'd only be escalated to a local level if it involved a complex scenario, a complex setting. This obviously is something that's in the middle of that. You know, it's people they can't reach, but you wouldn't call it complex necessarily. So anyway, I'm probably being too charitable because you know, everyone is asking for this now. Areas are ready to do more local contact tracing. This should have been the approach from the start, to be honest. So we're almost kind of having to retrofit a national program that isn't working properly, but it needs to, and it needs to happen right now. And the point I would say, Ross, if I could make a kind of point in conclusion, you know, it's been tough these last few days, and I just gave Samantha the figures before. You know, obviously it was a difficult weekend for people. All of a sudden, you know, they had plans for the weekend. Those plans were thrown into chaos. I don't want to get into a position where it looks like we're blaming the public. On the whole, the Greater Manchester public have been brilliant because they've looked out for each other. They've tried to do the right thing. The vast majority of people have done that, and we are really grateful to them for bearing with us and helping us. And you know, I'm certainly not getting to a position where it's all about blaming the public. No, you know, obviously we all were adjusting to a new situation last weekend, and we need to sort of you know, now kind of really focus, as Richard said, listen to the clear message that we've got now, and then move forward on that basis. But I would say this to the government in relation to the question Jen's asked. You know, we have identified today simple things that need to be done to improve contact tracing so that we can hopefully remove the need for these kind of restrictions later down the line. But if these things aren't done, our ability to persuade the Greater Manchester public later into this year and into the winter that blanket restrictions are unavoidable and, you know, just the way it is, it will diminish if the government hasn't demonstrably done all of the things it can do now to plug the gaps in the system and to make it work better. So it's in their own interest to work with us to do that, because we will all find it more difficult to persuade people to accept blanket restrictions if it is blatantly obvious that things that could have been fixed haven't been fixed. So that is an important message. We've got to carry the public with us on this, and that means doing the things that government can do and that we can do together to minimise the chances that we will be having to disrupt people's lives later down the line. If we don't do the things that are within our power, then rightly the public will get more and more frustrated, and I would fully understand that. So that's the message that's coming out from us today. You know, it's been a tough few days, but I think we are clear about what needs to be done. I hope the government is too, and I think we need to get back to a point where we are kind of moving quickly in tandem to put things right. And I think that itself will be a reassuring sight for the Greater Manchester public to see.